Hello, everyone, and happy Monday. We welcome you into the Go 24/7 podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, we want to say hello. We also want to let you know to hit that subscribe button and make sure you like and comment down below in the video. And if you're listening on audio, maybe on your way to work, your way to the gym, or your way home, wherever you might be listening, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple Podcasts, we want to make sure that you hit the subscribe button there as well so you know when the latest episodes drop. Bryce Koon alongside Glen West today as we talk a new hire, defensive line coach hire for the LSU Tigers. Brian Kelly goes out and makes his move. And Glenn, it was a move that was made obviously a little over after a month of kind of the official search. LSU concludes spring ball, most notably, so does South Carolina. And that's where they go and find their man in Columbia, South Carolina, Jimmy Lindsay, which, Glenn, this is a guy that, when you look at the resume, he's got a wealth of experience. He's got a deep experience in this room. I know a lot of people were concerned about, the resume not being, up to par with what LSU wants, especially this stage of kind of the rebuild or the reload. But Glenn, kind of, break it down. Who is Jimmy Lindsay and what is LSU getting in him?
Yeah, I think probably first and foremost, he's a 23-year coach with a lot of experience coaching in the South. He's networked a lot down here. He's got a lot of relationships down here in the South through all of his years, whether it was at Western Kentucky, he spent a short stint at Georgia Southern. He was, a number of spots over the last several years. I think it's one of those hires where you don't really know what you're getting on the surface, but I think the biggest thing that I kind of took away from it is that you have to trust what Brian Kelly did here. I mean, he's serviced a lot of these coaches in the last year and a half and brought them in, and not all of them have had the resumes that a guy that like Lindsay has had. I mean, he's probably somebody that I think LSU is hoping to get in here and take his talents to another level. I think you could say the same thing about a guy like cornerbacks coach Robert Steeples, who a year and a half ago, nobody had really heard of, and he was really had much more of a high school background, and here he is, pulling in 4- and 5-star talents and elite guys out of the transfer portal and all that stuff. So I think I just kind of come back to trusting Brian Kelly with this. It wasn't a name that I think we heard a whole lot throughout the process, which is why maybe it caught some by surprise. I think that the relationship that he has with Matt House, they worked together for about a year at Gardner Webb back in the mid 2000s. So it's been a while since they've worked together, but their paths have certainly crossed since then, when House was at Kentucky and Lindsay was at Western Kentucky. So there's a lot of, I think that relationship probably played a role in who Kelly was deciding on. And then, another big factor here is that it doesn't really mess with kind of the goals or trajectories of what they're doing here with the defensive line. You're still going to have John Jancic coaching the outside linebackers. Lindsay has been much more of an interior defensive line coach throughout his career. So he's going to stick with that. You still have Gerald Chapman on staff, so you still have a very familiar face who's going to be out there on the field with a lot of those guys. And so, I think it was, I think probably the best way that you can put it is that you hope Kelly gets it right, and that this is a guy who can come in and be a really solid developmental piece for this D line. It's a step up. I put that in my article. It's a step up for him in terms of recruiting, in terms of expectations, and now we just got to see what this guy has.
Glenn, I wanted to touch on this because we talked about his experience, and he's got lots of experience at some really good stops too. And I'm going to throw this on the board as well. But I reached out to a guy that was a couple years older than me in high school that went and played at Georgia Southern, and I was actually in middle school. He was in high school at the time, and he was there towards the end of the tenure of Lindsay. And he said, look, players loved him. So he said, that's something that really matters. And we've seen, Glenn, every single coach that is, even in Chapman, which a lot of people thought that Gerald Chapman was going to, get a real look. And I think he did get a real look at this job. If he stays, that obviously shows he's bought in. But I think that we're seeing a similar tune with you have to have a really good relationship with the kids in your position group. And that's something that, from everything we've heard, Lindsay does have that. Talking about some of the talent that he had at South Carolina, obviously, the biggest name that we've seen recently, obviously, was taken this past week in the draft, and that's Zach Pickens, who was a top 10 recruit overall in the 2019 class per 24/7 Sports. But they obviously develops him into the day two pick he was. Look, I mean, he's walking into a room in Baton Rouge that arguably has the most talent he's ever seen in one room on the same team wearing the same colors. So, Glenn, I mean, what is the expectation? I mean, this is a guy that can grow into the job. That's where I kind of sit, that he can grow into this new role at a different place, at a higher place. Look, South Carolina had a really good season last year, and he did a good job with that defensive front. Now, look, I love how we put the post on the board, and folks are like, well, the folks on the South Carolina board seem to be glad that he's gone, and and that's just the natural banter between fan bases. But I like this pickup, and I think that when you look at what the room that he inherits in Baton Rouge, look, you're going to have a lot of guys that help him out. Mason Smith, Mekhi Wingo, that's going to help his cause, guys that have been here, and they're really, really good players.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You can throw Quincy Wiggins, Jacobian Guillory, Savion Jones. I mean, he's going to be working a lot with those guys. And those are all really high 4-5 star talents that LSU's brought in the last couple of years. So his developmental, stage of his career is going to be really tested here in the first year, and how he can continue to improve those guys. We've seen a lot of improvement, I think, from Jacoby and Guillory with the added reps that he's had this offseason. And now you're going to be getting back Smith and Wingo, and certainly if Quincy Wiggins can kind of live up to the year two hype, and certainly Savion Jones is a guy that you saw have success and kind of up and down. He was more of a rotational guy last year, but I think he's going to be seeing the field a lot more this year. So those are all pieces here that are going to be guys that you hope are at least day two kind of picks in the next couple of years. And certainly in Mason Smith's case, you hope that he can get himself back into that round one consideration with a dominant year in Baton Rouge, and certainly saw flashes of that as a freshman. But I mean, look, I think the biggest thing here, at least short term, is going to be how he relates to the players, how he gets in here and starts building the camaraderie and the chemistry of this group. Because it's different when you welcome a new coach in there. LSU did it a couple of years ago with Brad Davis, and it was an adjustment. It was an adjustment period there, I think, for those players at the time, and certainly for Coach Davis. But a few years later, Brad Davis is probably one of the most respected coaches in this entire staff. And so, it can be done. You can kind of make a little bit of a later pulling the trigger on a coach like this and still see it work out. I think the fact that LSU has elite talent across the defensive line is certainly going to help Lindsay's chances of getting this group to where it hopes to go. And then the longer term piece of this is how it affects recruiting, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more in a minute. But certainly, I think probably the next several months, it's just going to be okay, how can I best build relationships with these guys, get them to buy into what I know as a coach and how I teach, and see if that can't rub off on some of the players in a positive way.
Well, that minute's up. We're going to talk recruiting right now and what that angle looks like right here. Look, when you lost Jamar Cain, we knew that no matter really who you brought in, unless they were making a Jamar Cain clone, you were going to lose a little bit of a step. And it was going to be some ground you had to build up in that. With where I saw this on the board and I thought it was a great question. He did pretty solid. Lindsay did pretty solid at South Carolina for where South Carolina was as a program, in the early years of Shane Beamer. Obviously, they've got a lot of, momentum rolling now over there in Columbia. But, he did a good job with where they were and kind of in their rebuild. Does the LSU logo, and I talk about this a lot on, other podcasts or anything like that, sometimes brand name matters. The LSU logo on the polo, Glenn, how much is that going to affect the job that he can do when he walks into a high school, when he walks into a recruit's home, when he, when he's got the LSU defensive line coach on his Twitter bio and they're DMing folks? I mean, how much is that going to affect, you think, in this sense of now he gets to elevate? Because I think just by the virtue of that logo, just by the virtue of that brand, you're going to get to walk into some homes that maybe that door was locked previously.
Oh yeah, it's going to be huge. And look, I think probably the most important thing here throughout all of this is that as LSU's been going through their coaching search here, they've hosted a number of the top defensive line players in the country the last month or so. I mean, you just had a huge
Yeah.
spring game here where Colin Simmons was probably the headline player, and he spent a full 3 days with the LSU staff and was able to really, I think, build on that relationship. Our guy Steve Wiltfong had a crystal ball in him in LSU going back to last summer, and just reading and watching what Steve has had to say the last several weeks, or last couple weeks, I should say. He feels as good about it as on that crystal ball as any time. And so now you officially have that D-line coach in here. You can probably bring back Simmons and a number of the defensive line prospects you're hoping to land. Certainly, Dominic McKinley is going to be on that list, the number one player out of Louisiana. They really want him. I mean, he is absolutely far and away their top in-state recruit that they would love to get their hands on. And Lindsay's going to have to be a big part of selling LSU now that he's here. So we're going to see in the next several months just kind of how he adjusts to recruiting in Baton Rouge. It's certainly different than I'd say probably 98% of other programs around the country. Yeah. And, it's going to be really interesting. I think it's from everything we've heard, he's very personable. He relates to the players well. And it's going to be something where, yeah, I kind of go back to what Matt House said this spring when talking about what he learned back in the SEC for just his 1 year, and that it's a game that's won in the trenches. And so LSU, you prioritize quarterbacks for sure, but offensive line and defensive line are probably 2A and 2B in terms of importance of landing the right prospects and competing in this league. And so the defensive line is going to be extremely, extremely important to make sure that it doesn't lose a step. The LSU's done a nice job of recruiting these 5-star players the last several years, these high 4-star guys on our service. So, it's going to be really important for Lindsay to step in and in the long term, make an impression on a lot of these recruits and see if they can't lock down a pretty elite 2024 class.
And two, I believe that the relationships that Jamar Chapman has built with Chapman building some of these guys. I think that
Gerald Chapman.
Gerald Chapman, Jamar Chapman, different name, different time. But Gerald Chapman, in this sense, what he's been able to do, building some of the relationships. If he stays on board, which I don't know about you, Glenn. I mean, he seems pretty bought into what Kelly wants to do and wanting to be at LSU. So I don't see him leaving since he did not get the job. But I think, too, being able to, those two to work together, that's going to be really, really big to see. And it kind of leads us into our next topic of conversation, the transfer portal. LSU fans can breathe a big sigh of relief because the midnight deadline passed on Sunday, and no Garrett Nussmeier entered the portal. And we started to get the feeling, especially after that spring game and towards the end of it, that this was a situation where he really wants to be at LSU. Baton Rouge is where he wants to be, and he feels comfortable. Glenn, we've been saying it ever since I first came on, and we talked right after the Citrus Bowl. They needed to make him feel comfortable, and I think they did their job with that. We may not know all that ins and outs, but he obviously feels comfortable rolling into 2023 with whatever package they have for him. But elsewhere in this portal, I mean, you put up a piece today. I mean, this team's in great shape, really great shape. We had some depth concerns at different places, and you've got places they could go look to, but nothing that really hurt this team. Nobody entered, and they sit really well kind of entering now. I'll say you get into the evaluation period. The market is set for the players that are in. No one else can enter, and now they get to kind of look and see where they want to go.
Yeah, man, I think probably first and foremost you got to headline this thing by saying that LSU's got 13 players coming in this summer that were not a part of spring ball. 12 freshmen and 1 transfer in Mason Lunsford. So you're going to have 5 offensive linemen that are new. The secondary is going to have some new pieces in there as well. So. I think it's important to add that there is some depth coming, which kind of affected the way I looked at the transfer portal in this piece that we're talking about here. But just kind of diving into it, I know you also are probably writing about it too. Just positions that I think LSU could use more quality veterans in. I think you got to start at safety, certainly running back, tight end. Another offensive lineman, even those all make sense for LSU in terms of what they're looking at here as the portal dust kind of settles and you kind of know who's in and who's out. And it's just going to be really important, I think, for LSU to add a couple of pieces here in the next couple weeks to just solidify some of the depth concerns that you have at some of those positions. I think running back, you look at it on the surface, it's got 6 players in it in that room already. When you include Caleb Jackson, who's the freshman that's coming in
Yeah.
this summer, but there's injury history there, and you don't know what you're going to get with John Emery, and we kind of said that verbatim on the board and through articles is who can you trust in that running back room to be there on game 13, game 14 when you're
Yeah.
potentially playing in postseason football. Last year, that pretty much meant just a healthy Noah Kane and John Emery every once in a while, and Josh Williams was banged up by that point, and so there just wasn't a whole ton of options there for LSU. I think as the
Yeah.
season waned, and I don't think they want to be in that kind of position, which is why you look at a guy like Logan Diggs out of Notre Dame, who was in the transfer portal, got recruited by Coach Kelly, is a Louisiana native, picked Notre Dame when Coach Kelly was there. Makes a lot of sense for LSU to go in and bring in a guy like Logan Diggs. And so he had over 800 yards rushing last year. I think 6 or 7 touchdowns, and it brings a different dynamic to this running back room. I think he's a guy that has big playability. He had a 75-yard touchdown reception. He had a 50-yard touchdown run, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's opportunity there to see him and to have snaps available to him too, because of you just don't know what you're going to get out of this running back room. So I think you probably start there. That's pretty much the only name right now that I can confirmed that LSU's had interest in and is speaking to, and would love, I think, to add to this roster. But certainly over the next several days and several weeks, you'll learn more names. And LSU's roster right now is at 78 of 85. Sonny got that confirmed from a number of sources. So you have potentially 7 players that you could add. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
LSU is going to get up to 7 or anything like close to that. I think they could add maybe 2 or 3 more and feel a little bit better about where they're at heading into the summer.
A name that we haven't mentioned, it's been thrown on our board, but obviously LSU tackle Will Campbell is very familiar with him. He threw up on his Instagram. He was advocating for A.J. Allen, the Nebraska running back, played at Neville. So that's maybe a guy. He's got multi-years of experience left, and like we said, that's nothing official that we've heard or anything. But Will Campbell said, hey, I wouldn't mind having you come and playing as my teammate again in LSU. He entered the portal, and I think he has 3 years left of eligibility. So, and we said this, I think, when we talked about the running back position. It's going to be interesting how they handle it, Glenn, because I don't know how many guys, maybe one you could take. And I like the addition if they can go and get Diggs, because Diggs has, not as many years of eligibility, and that keeps the door open for Caden Durham, which I think is just a fantastic talent out of Duncanville. And the pitch would have to change if you did bring in A.J. Allen. And Glenn, I want to end it with this, kind of on the portal conversation. I sit in the camp of where you add this is a talent. You have to add as much talent as possible. It is talent accumulating, and you just let it play out on the field. And it feels like LSU is trending towards a roster that is getting to the point. What does it speak to you, having been at spring practice, watching some of the battles happening, obviously being at the spring game, and everyone just said, you know what, we're good. We're going to stay here. I mean, what does that say to you when it talks about buying in from the program, buying into the staff and the vision for LSU?
I think it means that the coaching staff has got these players in really locked unison. I think it's you look at some of these positions like wide receiver, and uh, certainly with what you're hoping to get along the offensive line here in the next couple weeks. There's only 5 spots, on the
Yeah.
offensive line. There's only 3 spots at receiver, and yet you have legitimately, I think, 2, 3 deep at receiver right now. I mean, you have 8 or 9 receivers that you're going to be having on this roster that are really, really competent players. And so, and then you look at the Garrett Nussmeier situation and how he just he wanted to be here. I mean, I think he believes that he's the future of this program. Jaden Daniels certainly has a year left, and I think those two have certainly grown a lot closer in the last year since Jaden got here. But Garrett is a guy that I think wanted to wait his time. He understands that I think the future is his to man this offense, and so. I think the fact that LSU also got him involved with a lot of first team reps this offseason, let him know that they're committed to him moving forward. So that's another really important piece of all this. So, I think it just really more than anything highlights just how the player coach relationship and the player program buy-in has been there for the last several months and with this group, because I think the other thing that we haven't really talked about yet is LSU, they're probably going to be a top 10-ish team in the country heading into next
Yeah.
year. I mean, I think when you win 10 games in your first year under a new program, and by all accounts, your roster has improved from last year. The expectations are a lot higher going into year two here. And I think that there are a lot of players that see that, a lot of players that see that opportunities could be on the horizon for them. And potentially adding some hardware to their resumes. I mean, that's kind of the goal here. They won the SEC West last year, and I think that's a great stepping stone to build on. And certainly, I think the way the roster is shaping up here, LSU is going to be right there, I think, with the best of the SEC, and I think a lot of the players can see that.
Yeah, and I'll go on record saying this. I think it's the best quarterback tandem in the conference, and arguably probably in the country, just pure talent wise. And look, we're not going to talk about too many other teams until we get to game week previews in the fall. But when you start to look around the SEC West, you start to really feel good about the quarterback situation. And I know there's a lot of internal discussion between fans of who should start. Well, look, you're talking about two guys that are more than capable of starting. There's some other programs we've seen recently, a program that LSU beat last year that had to go outside after the spring game and bring in a guy. So LSU's in a really good situation. One more name I wanted to mention, and you did a great job of it in your article, was Marlon Martinez, a guy that we kind of thought through the entire process, maybe he's going to test it. With some injuries along the offensive line this spring, although that you never want to see that and you don't want that to happen, it's a good result because Martinez got enough first-team reps where he said, and obviously you feel like it as well, he feels like he can contribute and he feels like that he can step in if need be, because Glenn, it's a little too much, I say, sunshine if you're thinking that you're going to roll the same five guys out there, and LSU fans found that out last year.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was a lot of attrition, I think, on that offensive line last year, on the interior in particular. I mean, it's for the first month or so of the season, they were having a different center lined up before Charles Turner finally kind of locked in on that job. And Turner missed an entire spring here, and that was great reps for Marlon Martinez. And I completely agree with you there. I think that he and Bo Bordelon, Kimo McIntyre, those are guys who are on scholarship that we're part of the two deep offensive line this spring. It was tough, I know, on LSU to kind of get in the practices that they wanted with the offensive line the way that it was. But I think those reps were invaluable for those players. And you never know. I mean, we'll still hear names that trickle out in the next day or two. We don't expect, as of Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning, for many or any LSU players to enter their name in the portal. But if there was maybe one or two, I might lean towards the offensive line just because of what they have coming in. But other than that, I mean, I think LSU is just in a great spot. And I just, I mean, with their O-line, with the depth they have there, what you're bringing in with the freshman talent, just a lot of optimism, I think, heading into the offseason here. And certainly this is going to be a time for development for that group and the offense as a whole. You're going to see a lot of Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier videos thrown to the LSU receivers. I would imagine that those videos start leaking out and sometime during the summer as well. So, it's going to be a big time summer for LSU, certainly for the offensive line and this offense that I think is going to have to be the heart of this team. I think you're looking at this offense as the group that's going to have to carry LSU to where they want to go this year. And that's a good place to be in when you got the kind of talent that LSU has in that group.
Yeah, and a quick clarification for fans. You say, hey, whoa, now, I thought nobody was entering the portal. Compliance has to have the paperwork done by midnight on Sunday. Now, that doesn't mean that someone's name's not in and it hasn't been publicly released or leaked yet. But like we've said, as of right now, it doesn't feel like there's anything. And you would start to kind of see those social media announcements and the sources start to talk, especially with Sonny Ship, who does a fantastic job on our site of talking with sources and being well connected, you would start to kind of see that trickle out in the next 24 hours, I would say. So right now, nothing as we record this at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. But I know there's going to be one or two fans that say, whoa, now. You said that on Sunday it was over. It is, but the paperwork officially has to be signed and dotted lines and everything from there. Hey, as we wrap up here, go check out all the coverage for the NFL Draft. If you missed any of it, if you were hanging out with the family this weekend, and you said, "Where did LSU players go?" Well, we have I think the most comprehensive coverage of the NFL Draft for LSU Tigers. Obviously, undrafted free agents, a lot of good fits. Dylan Sanders did a good piece on his 3 best fits of where he felt like some guys went. And Glenn, I know we have a lot of Saints fans. Do you have a quick draft grade?
Yeah, I would say maybe a solid B. To be honest, outside of LSU, I do not do a ton of draft coverage or draft analysis. So, really like their day 1 pick and Bryce,
Yeah.
I think is how you pronounce it. But
Mm-hmm.
to be determined. It's been a lot of hit and miss for Saints over the last couple of years. So I'm going to leave judgment for a later time.
Well, one thing you didn't leave judgment for, and if you want to join in the conversation, was talking about the other person's favorite NFL team and the quality of the franchise that they have over on the boards. And so
Takes
that
a
was
running
a lot
back
of fun.
top 10. That's
Hey, NFL, college football is going to be here before we know it, and the draft just concluded. But seriously, do make sure, if you missed it where anyone went, head over to our website. Make sure you get a VIP subscription. You can join in on some of the fun banter that we had and some good board posts all throughout the weekend. Baseball, we're going to get a baseball podcast in this week as well, talking about a big weekend they've had against Alabama. They're heading to Auburn this weekend, so getting closer to Hoover, closer to Glen, hoping, praying, crossing his fingers he gets to make a trip to Omaha this summer as well, which that wouldn't be too bad for Glen West as well. But hey, that's all the time we got for today. Thanks for tuning in to the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon. He is Glen West. Make sure you do a couple things before we go. Subscribe to the channel, completely free. It helps us, and it helps you know when the latest episodes drop, whether it's on audio or on YouTube. Either of those things completely free for you to be a part of. And make sure to join Go 24/7. We've got some great stuff coming out continuously, talking the portal, talking baseball. We think we have the best comprehensive coverage of baseball, and I don't think too many people would disagree with that, with Glenn, Dylan, myself, and Sonny doing a fantastic job over here on this site. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on the Go 24/7 podcast.